Hey, welcome to Scratching the Surface. I'm Jarrett Fuller, and this is a podcast about curiosity and studio culture. Today on the show, I am joined by Jeanne Gang. Jeanne is the founding principal and partner of the architecture firm Studio Gang and is a professor of practice at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. At Studio Gang, Jeanne works on projects that range from books and publications through exhibitions and civic buildings all the way up to skyscrapers and urban plans. The thread that connects this work is Jeanne's belief in what she calls actionable idealism, or this idea that they need to be both pragmatic and idealistic in all of the work that they take on. This is driven by the studio's deep belief in the importance of research, curiosity, and exploration at every stage of the process, from idea development to formal and material exploration. And this is what we spend a lot of time talking about in this conversation. We talk about the role of research in the design process and how they developed a studio culture that attempts to sort of flatten hierarchies and empowers everyone at the studio at all levels to be curious, to bring ideas, and to be engaged in the world. We also talk about how this connects to her work in the classroom and the expanding definitions of architecture and how that influences the studio's output. This was a great conversation. I really appreciated Jeanne's thoughtfulness, and it was so nice to hear about how these ideas really truly manifest themselves in a studio culture and in a studio environment. Don't forget, Scratching the Surface is made possible because of listener support. If you enjoy this show and want to help support it, you can become a member for just $5 a month or $50 a year. These memberships truly help keep the podcast going. Members get an exclusive monthly newsletter that I think of as the director's commentary for the show. It includes reflections on the episodes, previews of upcoming episodes, as well as other bonus content and interviews and links. If you want to help the show, if you want to see it continue, I hope you consider becoming a member. All you have to do is visit scratchingthesurface.fm/members to get all the details and sign up. Thanks again for listening, and here is my conversation with Jeanne Gang. Start this conversation actually talking about something that I've heard you talk about quite a bit, which is this idea of kind of how you define your work as actionable idealism. I've heard you talk about this in lectures. It's actually the first two words in your intro in the new monograph. Can you talk about what actionable idealism means and how you think about that in the studio?
Yeah, I was, you're always trying to, as a person who's creative and working with other creative people, um, trying to define what it is that you do, that is what drives you, what is interesting, what makes you tick. And I think there's different categories of that. For example, I know I like to work with organizations that, like for our projects, organizations that are kind of looking for design to help them create a new part of their future, like, a
Mhm.
change, for example. And so that kind of describes like the type of projects we do. But then there are just these curiosities and um, this level of care about our own shared environment. And so sometimes the projects maybe aren't always from a client, and they really generate from within the studio, or within my brain, and then share it with people to the studio. And then we talk about how we can do something with design to make something change,
Mm.
or be enhanced, or just transformed. And so after I started noticing this pattern with what we do when we do this, it really, to describe it, I really just needed to boil it down, and it comes out with these two terms that seem like they are contradicting each other. Because when
Yeah.
you're actionable, right? You're actionable, you're kind of like pragmatic maybe, or
Mhm.
um, a doer, and then you have idealism, which is, you think of a lofty, ideals and things that are unrealistic. But it really is the two coming together. You need to imagine what, and use your imagination, and think about what could be and what you want to see. And but then I get a big thrill out of making progress toward that and not
Mm,
letting it sit
mhm.
on paper. So that's how the two terms came together, and it really does describe, how I think my my motivation for doing design, and I would say that extends to my colleagues that I work with at Studio Gang. We all really enjoy that, and um, we're always looking for those things that we can like make happen.
Does that I mean, it must manifest itself differently, but I'm interested in, if it's a project that comes out of your brain, like you said, versus a client project, and your client projects range from kind of cultural institutions, small kind of civic buildings to skyscrapers and urban planning essentially. Uh, does that idea of actionable idealism, is that there from the beginning, kind of how you decide what project you're going to take on? Are there projects that are just, intellectually or creatively interesting to you? And then this kind of, how can we make progress on it? Kind of you find a way into it. Where does that actually fit into the client work as opposed to these kind of projects that you're
Mm.
self-generating?
Well, I think a lot of the clients that we work with, they might also have the same, you
Mm,
know, mindset, and they are, you know, in their realm, whatever, if it's an arts or cultural organization, um, they're trying to, work on something, change it, improve it. Um, and they would see that design is like helps facilitate that, and so I'm drawn to those kinds of people, I think, and the
mm,
projects, and they might be drawn to me, but usually, there's that core aspect of the project, like really what is the program and how can we make that really work for that client. But there's also other um, narratives swirling around that are, when you put anything into the world, it has an impact. So oftentimes I just like to think about and to articulate what are those other issues that are put into play. Um, so I would call that problematizing, the project.
yeah,
um,
yeah, yeah.
and it might not be central in the beginning, or it might come into play at different times, but it is important for me to know why this project is going to be existing and what the potential of it is. So yes, for both the private projects, the projects that we do with organizations or individuals, as well as these projects that are maybe pulling together threads that are not necessarily architectural projects, but thinking of how architecture can intersect with those.
I mean, I've heard you talk before about how you often think about architecture as a medium. It's a medium that you can kind of explore these things that you're interested in, or talk about, broader cultural or societal issues. Um, I'm interested in, like, how when is it different? Is it different at all with if it's something that is self-generated from the studio that may or may not be a building, versus a client? How do you think about talking about these larger
Mm.
issues? Do you know what I mean? Is
Yeah,
that
I think I know what you mean. I think, like, the student, and I was giving a talk in Spain one time, and the student raised their hand and they said, um, that AI is coming, and anyone can generate architecture without architects. So, what are you going to do about that? Um, and I said, I think I would still be an architect if there were no projects, right? Because that's the way
Mm,
that's my medium, as you say, to express myself, or I should say ourselves. That's our medium that we use to make projects on the world, and that's built form is the way that we can impact the world as architects. So even if there were no clients, I would probably still be. I mean, if robots came and did all of the architecture with no clients, I couldn't get out of the fact that I'm still an architect and I would still be designing things for the world. That's just what I do. So I think,
Right.
um, yeah, I don't know if it answers it exactly, but
Yeah, I mean, there's always that student that says something like, "Well, AI is gonna do it." It's the same thing in graphic design. It's oh, code can just make these layouts now, but there's still something, there's still
Right.
something about, why we have to do this. It reminds me of another, uh, thing that you talk about in the newish book, I guess we should say now. It came out at the end of 2020, where you're kind of talking about these changing definitions of architecture, actually, and you write that this type of work that you're doing, this actionable idealism, also demands that we engage in a range of architectural pursuits that include, but are not limited to, the design of new buildings. And I think that's really interesting, and I'm curious. I think the fact that you said architectural pursuits that are not limited to new buildings suggests that architecture doesn't just need to be about building, that it could be, as the studio does, publications, research projects. Do you see all of that as an architectural project?
Yes, I would say that is and it overlaps, of course, with things that you do as,
Hmm.
a graphic designer or things that others do, but those to me are the expanded. But I also meant by that statement that things don't have to be new. I mean, there's
Mm-hmm.
invention that can happen to buildings that are already there, and that's a really important part about going forward to realize that reusing and transforming and reinventing things is going to be more and more crucial as we have to start limiting our carbon.
Hmm.
And a lot of the carbon is spent on, totally new ground up things. So a lot of the research that I have been doing through the GSD at Harvard
Hmm.
Graduate School of Design has been focused on every project is focused on reusing something, but and in different ways. Like that, it could be that it's completely reinvented. It might be a respectful, kind of incisions and very precise modifications. But how can we just, make those things last longer? I mean, if you look at other cultures, there is a constant reuse of buildings,
Yeah.
and we've been just throwing them away, tearing them down, and
Yeah.
um, at a rate that I always was suspicious, like why are they just because you always hear these same explanations that it's more expensive to build to
Right.
renovate this than to build
Right.
new. Now, that's not taking into account, the calculation of the carbon, of course.
Hmm.
Or you hear that it's obsolete, that there's no way it can work because it's obsolete. But what I mean, people use buildings that are 200 years old, 300 years old. I mean,
Hmm.
it is possible. So anyway, I wanted to explore this more intellectually, like, these different methods. So of caring for older buildings
Mm.
or changing them and not necessarily in the preservation mode, just I'm just talking about, like, starting with what's already there. So that's also part of what I was saying in the beginning of the book. We don't have to define architecture so narrowly, and I think most architects know this, of course, because a lot of architects are doing renovations, but you have this group of architects that are really the most well-known ones, and
Hmm.
they are most well known for their brand new buildings, of course, and it's
Yeah.
great. I mean, I like doing that too, but I just think that there's a whole range of things that we can do that are impactful, and
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that 100%. I was thinking about this might be a better way to ask the question that I was trying to ask earlier about architecture as a medium. Actually, hearing you talk about the reuse or revitalization of old buildings, that it doesn't always have to be something new. um, and in preparing for this and thinking about you and thinking about this conversation, I obviously was also thinking about OMA, and I had Rainier DeGraff on the show a couple years ago to talk about ammo and the research arm, and he talked about, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, that ammo in many ways was a way to kind of monetize their research, and that they could clients could hire them and not necessarily build a building. And I know you spent some time at OMA, and like we can or cannot talk about that. Like, I'm not
Mhm.
sure if this is directly related to your experience there, but I'm interested in, do you also have clients come to you who say, we want a new building, and then when you get into the research, I hope this isn't a reductive question, you get into the research and you're like, actually, it's not a new building that you need, it's something else, it's reusing what you have, it's some sort of campaign here. How does that kind of happen in the studio?
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I don't think that we have had people come to us to um, do an analysis, which is
Mm-hmm.
like research of what's there, what how to, especially with something that's as big as a campus. Um,
Right.
and and I'm not sure if the research that we do, it wouldn't have been to, as OMA said, to like monetize it as
Right.
as um, it's it's a true like curiosity or something that we feel that hasn't been explored in an academic sense, like that this could be fleshed out better. And
Mm,
using practice as a kind of support to an academic interest. But those things, they pay off in a different way, which is um, when situations arise, there's an index inside your brain that is like, and not only within my brain, within our studio brain, that can apply research that has been done to new problems. Um, and so that's more how it works than
got it.
the aspect of someone specifically coming to us, though that does happen. I was thinking of the Kresge UC Santa Cruz
Mm,
project that we are working on, where there was a lot of historic research about Charles Moore and
mhm.
his his firm that did the Kresge College campus, and
Yeah.
it was so interesting to. I didn't realize, like, going into that, like, how much engagement that he had done with groups, student groups, and so on. So anyway, it was very interesting to analyze the buildings that were there, to see, to think about um, the way that that campus was designed and what his intentions were, and then pair that with looking at the condition of the buildings, which ones could be saved, which
Mhm.
ones needed serious modifications, and for ADA and other reasons. But overall, it was a very strong research project on that specific place to make recommendations about how to move forward and add more student housing and more amenities and for that campus. So it was like that was one case where it was simultaneous, like research was happening and
Yeah.
and design propositions happening at the same time.
Let me ask you this though, because it's interesting, in almost everything that I read about you in preparing for this, the focus on research is so central to the the narrative about you and about the studio, that it is a research driven studio, that the work is driven by kind of theoretical ideas or intellectual ideas, that research is central to the process. Where did that come from? Do you have a sense of where your interest in the research side, or the focus on the research side,
Hmm.
came from in your practice?
Well, I would say that this a way of practicing that incorporates research surely was, part of our method at OMA. But before that, I was at Harvard, and um, in using, like just in an academic sense, it's just how you start a project, and so it's second nature. But I think you also have to have research be meaningful. Um, it it's like it's ongoing. It doesn't just stop
Hmm.
with the project. So um, there's this sense of collecting information and organizing that information, which is something that we do at the studio, and that is makes it more accessible for people to tap into that knowledge. It's about I'll often think of it like it's a love of knowledge. It's a love of knowledge
Right.
that is driving that approach, and when you just if you don't know the answer, like, and you want to know, like, that's um,
Yeah.
it's that's really at the core, and I think, I'm not unique in that, but
Hmm.
I certainly have it strongly, and then, others that have it are drawn to us, and it's so different than, just wanting to, stylize things, I guess, I mean, I'm trying to think of the
Yeah. Yeah.
the opposite approach of that is, um, I'm just
Yeah. I mean, it's not just formal, right? It's
right, it's finding those things that resonate and are relevant and, um, just, that touch on lots of different areas of knowledge
mhm.
and try to make sense out of patterns that exist in the world, whether
Yeah.
they're behavior patterns or formal patterns, like why do trees branch out the way that they do, or you know,
Yeah.
bark, or whatever. It could be something that's like a visual, but it also could be something like, what's the root cause of why this neighborhood is vacant, and those kind of things.
I'm curious how you I mean, I imagine now that the studio is well known enough that you attract a particular type of applicant who wants to work for you. But I'm interested, kind of when you were starting out and as you were growing the studio, how you fostered a studio culture that encouraged that type of curiosity, because I imagine that not every architecture studio allows for that kind of freedom, and that's something that seems very particular to you also. And you're talking about your love of knowledge and these things you're thinking about. How do you kind of externalize that to make that something that everybody participates in the studio?
Oh, that's a really interesting question because if you think about it, there's big things and small things. I mean, there are you would see in the studio collections of images of whales and sizes of them, and
Okay.
or the like an experiment on the rooftop with that goes longer year after year, one day a year, where we do a bioblitz to see how many different species are up there. Or it could be a materiality experiment going on. So there's a lot of things like that going on. There's book clubs. There are,
Mm.
there's a bibliography for every project that gives a list of
Oh, that's a great idea.
topics. Yeah, so there's a lot of little things going on like that. There's just, just talking about things in the studio when you're talking about design. How does it, how do we usually try to define what is the significant question for the project? Like what could it move? Ho What is this project? What's the essence of it, And so there's a lot of things like that that, bring it out, and then there are, I think yeah, so I think people are drawn to that. They're probably talking with other people that work there, and, or, they might have students or things like that, but um, it ends up you end up every office has their own culture, and it's like that kind of is ours. We also do like an outing, and every year, before COVID,
Mm.
every summer go to like a camp to to be
Right.
outside
Yeah.
together, and those are like all those are experiences. Experience is really important, and then trying to keep the culture, identifying what it is and trying to maintain it in different ways. And people take on parts themselves. I mean, it's not all me. It's definitely not.
Yeah.
It's like people that are, you know, organizing the lunches we have together, our office lunches, just to eat together, or um,
Hmm.
different aspects are just completely taken on by different people, like the book club, for example, um, and that kind of you have to kind of know your culture and
Yeah.
and to nurture it, because things change, the people change, come in and out, it grows, it shrinks, and so you want to hang on to the good things and
Yeah, and it's interesting too that I mean, I've heard you make the joke before that obviously Studio Gang is your name, but also the idea of a gang,
Yeah,
it's somewhat of a collective, and it's interesting to hear that so many of these things are kind of self-organizing or organized at kind of, any level in the studio, and this is a weird question, but how do you position yourself in a studio like that is named after you and that you are in some ways the face of it, but that somebody new can come in at any level in the studio and feel kind of empowered to participate in these, to bring ideas, to be curious, that it isn't this kind of hierarchical structure that we often hear about in architecture studios especially.
right. Yeah, like that's something that's really important to me, and I want to maintain that. And of course, that can, if as you grow in size, that can it needs more structure, and that can get lost. So you have to consciously maintain it. Um, I should say though, because we've been talking about all this peripheral things, not really peripheral, but not exactly 90% of the work, which is
Yeah.
doing the drawings and doing, um, but there's this level of craft in that is also something that, I mean, it takes more patience. Like I was saying, this experiment
Yeah.
on our roof is once a year. We've done it for 5 years, and it's ongoing, and that takes patience. Doing a project takes patience because it can go on for more than 1 year. It could go on for 4 years, and,
Mhm.
um, but every single aspect of it has different things that you gain knowledge of, and skill in, and experience in. And so that patience, it's patience, but it's also like, I like how architecture is always revealing new things that need to be known. Like,
Yeah.
it never ends. I mean, I learn things all the time. It never ends. So it's really a great, I love it so much because it has all that to offer. But it does take, it's harder, I've noticed, because when people first come out of school, they're like, yeah, this is the firm, and you're used to doing in school like
Mhm.
a project every semester, and this is like,
Right.
this is a project that is ongoing, but it's worth the wait, and it's worth the perseverance, and you get these different phases of it, but
Mhm.
it is something that is, a big part of what we're doing is like putting together this set of drawings that describes, it's modeling, it's drawing, it's describing this real thing that's gonna, you know, start showing up in real life.
Mhm.
You have to look at every corner of it, every inch of it. And
Right.
it's and there's a craft and skill to that. It is beautiful, and you know, it's really the essence of what architecture is, I think, and I know a lot of
Yeah.
peers or like peers, other architects that are doing a lot of work in widespread areas geographically. They don't always do their own drawings anymore because
Mm.
they are really more art directing it, and then we decided we were going to continue to keep this knowledge in within our
Mm.
so it like I said, it's another aspect of our office. I think that it's part of the culture that's like a respect for every phase of this project. And it,
Yeah.
yeah, not to say that we don't collaborate with other people sometimes and work and share that responsibility sometimes, but we definitely value that skill and try to maintain it within.
Yeah. No, I love that. It's really interesting too. I mean, again, I'm speaking from a graphic design perspective, but from what I understand, architecture studios are very similar, where it's like, you come in at a low level and you do this kind of work that maybe is needed but isn't valued as much, and then you work your way up to doing kind of more creative stuff, and then you get to one level where you're kind of not doing that anymore and you're just overseeing everything in this kind of flatter system that respects every part of the process and empowers every part of the process seems really nice.
Yeah, it is. It's like you've got to love what you do every day, um,
Yeah.
and if you can identify the design aspect of those other parts, whether even if it's a technical um, aspect, there's design to
Yeah.
it, for sure, and like those are fun to discuss with the group.
Yeah, and that goes back to kind of how we started this conversation in many ways, is that the design, the architecture itself isn't just the building of the building or the design of the building. It is the negotiating of the space. It's the working with the clients. It's the research.
Mhm.
It's that collaboration. All of that is architecture.
Yep, that's so true. Yes.
I have just a couple questions to begin to wrap up, but building off of what we were just talking about, and you had mentioned your work at the GSD earlier. I'm interested in how these ideas manifest themselves in the classroom. Are you also thinking about research, curiosity? This craftsmanship, kind of thinking long term, kind of following interests, community. How does that happen in a classroom setting?
Hmm. Well, a lot of times of course, you have a shorter period of
Mhm,
study,
mhm,
so, but a lot of times I've been trying to bring in as many aspects as possible to a studio project, like, even with engaging with different users or stakeholders of a future project, trying to talk with real people that normally you don't have time to do, but we've been trying to bring that
mm,
to the studio projects, and also touch on multiple subject matters like climate
mm,
change, rising waters, the topic of the program of a project, and what I found is like just giving the students as much like kind of like everything and they can start to hone in on what is more interesting to them of the many like the constellation of contingent elements of any project. And so
right.
it's giving I'm trying to help the students to um, identify what they are interested in instead of and showing that it's more of a it's really demonstrating more of a process of like this openness of
Mhm.
approach, as opposed to trying to teach them how I do my
Right,
what my formal although of
right.
course we're going to get some of that because I'm critiquing too, but and then they also bring things back that are interesting to them that are they're things that they discovered that are not necessarily what I put into the
Mm,
syllabus. So I really like that back and forth, I'm really trying to convey the the process of design on this in the way that I think about it, which is very broad to start out with, and you zoom into the aspect that's
Yeah.
the key kernel of it.
Speaking of you encouraging the students to kind of find their interests or bring their interests into the design process, what are your interests right now? Like, what are the things that are top of mind for you that you're thinking about a lot?
Well, it's the biggest zoomed out biggest things are climate change and the social inequity,
Yeah.
and those are probably going to be still, the top category for some time to come. Probably just my whole lifetime, I don't know. But, um, and then, like these really trying to, um, there's an aspect that I'm interested in about this type of city that is experiencing, um, I guess, blight or loss of building fabric, and
Mm,
and people like those kinds of, from an urban perspective, those kinds of areas that are kind of oftentimes written off, but there are actually very vibrant things going on in these areas, and so our urban practice has been looking for ways to activate and knit back together some of these types of places. And then, of course, I'm really looking from a philosophical perspective, like what is going on in the world politically, and how can we reframe um, our work um,
mm,
and position it to be powerful and bring
yeah.
forth important questions. These are just big things that I'm thinking about, like in that sense. That the after after modernity, and as the planet moved toward globalization, like what were the positive and negative things that came
Mhm,
out of that, and then like how can we reset, or where should
mm,
we reset our sights to make positive change toward the first two things, climate change and social
right.
inequity. Yeah. So those are kind of the big things I'm thinking about, and just reading, and discussing and thinking about those things. And then on a more material level, I think I'm really just continue to be interested in wood construction and how
Right.
to um, utilize this incredible material, um, but also um, like maybe other materials that could also be carbon sequestering.
Mhm.
Um, and those are kind of interesting things on the horizon that are, being used now, but are being pushed.
I just say that I loved that answer because it was like such a great example of what you've been talking about this whole conversation of kind of valuing both the research and the intellectual, but also the practical, also the craftsmanship. And that when I asked you what you were thinking about, you gave the answer of these, big issues: climate change, social inequality, but then also wood construction. It's like it just fully embodies how you've articulated your practice. You just answered it in that one question.
uh, yeah.
uh, my my last question, and this is the question that I used to end every conversation, and I have a sense this might be a hard question now after the previous question. What are you reading right now?
Oh, well, believe it or not, I'm reading the Marcus Aurelius's Meditations.
Oh, nice.
But um, what's amazing just about that is just the way that he is appreciating
Mm,
people in his life. It's so beautiful. It really is. I mean, like that's all it is. It's just a, like appreciation of this person for this reason.
Yeah.
It's so wonderful. But that was just because I grabbed that book. When I was heading out, and I couldn't put it down. And then
That it's so funny you say that because in the last week that has started showing up on my Kindle as like my most recommended, like I should read that next.
oh, maybe
Um,
because
just recently. So maybe I
I
should
think
pick it
because
up now.
you were Googling me and they know what you're reading.
Right.
That's weird. That is
That was it.
okay. No, but I think a new um what do you call it? A new edition came out recently.
Oh,
I'm reading the
that
old
could be it.
edition, but it's the same book. Okay, but
Okay.
someone else published it recently, so maybe that's why. But that's really good.
Okay.
I recommend it. But um, then I'm also, following and reading Bruno Latour as
Mm,
um, his latest works, and then like for fiction, I'm reading books. Well, I'm trying to read a number of books about this region that I'm um, visiting right now while
mm.
going between North Carolina and Chicago, and so I'm been reading about this place in North Carolina. So kind
Mm.
of a wide range, but I'm the type of person that has a bunch of like stack on the side of the bed, and you know, I'm reading
I had a
like,
feeling.
yeah, read a little of this and a little of that, and not exactly plowing through one full book. So I mean, in a way, it's a very bad habit, but um,
It doesn't surprise me at all. I don't know you really at all other than this conversation, but that seems right. I also love that you, in research for projects, that you read fiction and nonfiction. I think that's really nice, a really nice practice.
yeah, it's and novelists and are sometimes truer than reality, and so, that's I love stories and the narrative of the narrative arc of a story, um, well done. And
I think that's such a nice way to wrap up this conversation. I'm a big fan of your work and how you think about your work and how you approach your work, and it was really nice to just kind of pick your brain about how you kind of work through these issues and deal with them in the studio. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
thank you so much, Jarrett. It was my pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
This episode was recorded on January 12th, 2021. Our theme music is by Andy Borgasani. We're on Twitter and Instagram at Surface Podcast. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts and at scratchingthesurface.fm. Thanks for listening.